The call came in on Tuesday at 2:47 p.m. I was deep in acquisition reports for my newest development project when my phone vibrated against the polished mahogany desk. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Hello, this is Megan Manning from Legit Events Planning. The voice on the other end dripped with forced sweetness, the kind reserved for difficult clients and unexpected complications. I'm calling about the Henderson wedding this Saturday. Henderson. My maiden name. A name I'd shed 3 years ago like an ill-fitting coat, after finally growing exhausted from the constant belittlement and manipulation that came with being a Henderson daughter instead of a Henderson son. Yes, I replied shortly, setting down my gold-plated pen. My voice gave nothing away. I have some unfortunate news, Megan continued, and I heard her tone shift, colder now, more businesslike. She was enjoying this part, I could tell. By order of the family, you are no longer invited to the wedding. I'm sorry, but the guest list has changed. I leaned back in my leather executive chair and let my gaze drift to the panoramic view of Chicago spread out below me. My corner office on the 47th floor caught the afternoon light perfectly. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see construction crews swarming over the new Anderson Plaza, another property in my growing real estate empire that my family knew absolutely nothing about. I understand, I said calmly. Great, that was easier than I thought. Megan's relief was almost audible. I was told you might make a scene or something. Anyway, have a good day. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for several seconds, the screen slowly dimming. Then I laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh that echoed off the glass walls of my empty office. They actually did it. My own sister had cut me from the guest list at her wedding. A wedding that was taking place at Grandview Manor, the most exclusive and sought-after wedding venue in the entire city. A venue I had quietly purchased 6 months earlier through my holding company, Morrison Properties LLC. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. My assistant, George, appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. Ms. Anderson, your 3 o'clock appointment is waiting in the conference room. I was still smiling. Cancel it. George's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he simply nodded. He'd learned long ago not to question my sudden changes in direction. And George, yes, bring me the acquisition file for Grandview Manor. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. The same number. Hello, Ms. Anderson. Megan's voice had undergone a complete transformation. Gone was the condescending sweetness, the cold dismissal. In its place was something high-pitched, flustered, and teetering on the edge of panic. I am so sorry for the misunderstanding earlier. I had no idea. I mean, we didn't know that you own the entire venue. She was speaking too fast, the words tumbling over each other. Please, I'm begging you. Tell me we can fix this. The wedding is tomorrow. I let the silence hang between us, stretching it just long enough to make her squirm. I could hear her rapid breathing on the other end of the line, picture her pacing some immaculate office, her perfectly manicured hands shaking. Megan, I said finally, my voice calm and measured, I think we need to talk. Yes, of course, she blurted out. You can come here or I'll come to you, whatever is more convenient for you, Ms. Anderson. After all, you're the owner, and I'm just horrified by this misunderstanding. I'll be there in an hour. I ended the call and allowed myself a small smile. Then I grabbed my bag and headed for the elevator. Grandview Manor sat on 12 manicured acres in Highland Park, approximately 30 minutes north of downtown Chicago. I had fallen in love with it the moment I first saw it 6 months ago, a restored 1920s mansion with immaculate gardens, a grand ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests, and numerous smaller spaces for more intimate ceremonies. It was precisely the kind of place where Chicago's elite hosted their most significant celebrations. Debutante balls, charity galas, weddings that made the society pages. I hadn't purchased it out of sentimentality. I was far past that. It was simply a smart investment, one of many. The venue was booked solid for 2 years out. Couples paid anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 for their dream wedding at Grandview Manor. The profit margins were excellent, the prestige factor immeasurable. What I hadn't anticipated was that my sister Lisa would book it for her wedding to Kenneth Ashworth III, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune that stretched back 3 generations. According to my mother, Kenneth was finally a name worthy of the Hendersons. Never mind that the Hendersons' own fortune had been built on my unrecognized labor for years. I pulled my car into the long, tree-lined driveway and took in the familiar sight of the manor's elegant facade. The rose garden was in full bloom, the fountains were dancing, and somewhere inside, Megan Manning was probably hyperventilating. Good. Megan was waiting for me in the main lobby, practically wringing her hands with anxiety. She was younger than I'd expected, about 28, with impeccably styled blonde hair and a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The kind of woman who was used to being in control and was now discovering what it felt like to have that control violently ripped away. "Ms. Anderson," she exclaimed, rushing toward me the moment I crossed the threshold. Her heels clicked frantically against the marble floor. I cannot even express how sorry I am about that phone call. The words tumbled out in a rush. "I had absolutely no idea you were the owner. Your sister just said you were unwelcome and asked me to handle it." That's all I knew, I swear. "And what exactly did Lisa say about me?" I asked, following her through the elegant lobby toward the main office. My voice remained calm, curious even. Megan visibly tensed. She glanced back at me, then quickly away. She said a pause. A swallow. "She said you were a disappointment to the family. That you abandoned the family business for some failed startup. And that your presence would be embarrassing in front of her guests." I barely suppressed a laugh. Failed startup. If they only knew. 3 years ago, I had been a senior analyst at Henderson Financial Group, my father's prestigious investment firm. I was the dutiful daughter, grinding 60 hours a week, generating millions in profit, yet still treated like an intern who needed constant supervision. Every project I proposed was rejected or quietly implemented under someone else's name. Every success I achieved was attributed to a male colleague, usually my brother Marcus. And every mistake, no matter how minor, was blown up into a federal case, presented as proof that I lacked the innate qualities required to be a true Henderson. The last straw came when I discovered that Marcus had taken full credit for my work on a major municipal bond deal. A deal I had spent 8 months cultivating. A deal that brought the firm $12 million in fees. When I confronted my father in his corner office, he didn't even look up from his computer. "You're too emotional, Samantha," he'd said. "You should learn from your brother, not compete with him." That's what family does. I handed him my resignation the next morning. I took my savings, modest but sufficient, my contacts, my ideas, and my burning determination, and I completely disappeared from their world. They thought I had vanished into obscurity, another cautionary tale about a woman who couldn't handle the pressure. They had absolutely no idea that all this time, I had been building something far bigger than they could ever imagine. "Megan," I said, settling into the chair across from her cluttered desk. I crossed one leg over the other and met her anxious gaze. "Tell me about tomorrow's wedding." She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "The wedding?" "Yes, everything. I want to know it all." She pulled a thick folder onto the desk and flipped it open with a practiced hand. Despite her nerves, the organizer in her couldn't resist showcasing her work. "It's going to be stunningly beautiful," Megan began, enthusiasm creeping back into her voice despite the circumstances. 250 guests. Ceremony in the Rose Garden at 4 p.m. Cocktails on the terrace immediately following. Reception in the main ballroom with a sit-down dinner for all guests. She glanced up at me. The Ashworth family spared no expense. This event is easily $180,000 all in. I nodded slowly, processing the numbers. "And Lisa specifically said I was unwelcome?" Megan swallowed hard. Yes, she was very clear. She hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty was her only option at this point. She said, and I quote, "Under no circumstances should my sister be anywhere near this wedding. She has already disgraced our family enough, and I will not let her ruin the most important day of my life." Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger. I'd moved past anger years ago. This was something else. Clarity. The final confirmation of everything I'd suspected about my place in that family. Megan, I said evenly, leaning forward slightly. Call Lisa. Tell her there's a problem with the venue for tomorrow. A problem? Megan's brow furrowed in confusion. But everything is perfect. The flowers are being delivered at 8 a.m. The catering is confirmed, the staff is scheduled, the band already did their sound check yesterday. There is no problem. Tell her the hall was double booked. Tell her we need to discuss alternative options. Megan's face went pale, truly pale, the kind of blood-draining shock that no amount of expensive foundation could hide. But that's not true. And even if it were, we couldn't find another place of this caliber in less than 24 hours. Not for a wedding of this size and importance. It's impossible. I know, I replied simply. It took her a few seconds. I watched the realization dawn slowly, like sunrise creeping across the horizon. First confusion, then disbelief, then dawning horror as she understood exactly what I was asking her to do. Her eyes widened. Ms. Anderson, you can't be serious. Make the call. She stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign that this was some kind of test, a joke, anything but the cold reality of what was about to happen. She found nothing. I meant every word. With trembling fingers, Megan picked up her phone. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. What do you mean the hall was double booked? Lisa's voice was so shrill, so piercing, that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Even at a distance, I could hear the hysteria bubbling just beneath the surface. Lisa, I said calmly. Don't Lisa me. This is a disaster. Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on this wedding? She was screaming now, years of carefully cultivated social polish stripped away in an instant. The flowers alone cost $15,000. $15,000. And now you're telling me some incompetent planner messed up the booking? I will sue her. I will ruin her. I will. There was no mistake, actually, I interrupted. Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, electric, charged with the static of a mind struggling to process information that makes no sense. What? Lisa's voice was smaller now, confused. What are you talking about? I mean, Megan called you because I asked her to. I let that sink in for a moment. You see, Lisa, I've owned Grandview Manor for 6 months now. More silence. Longer this time. I could practically hear her brain short-circuiting on the other end of the line. Finally, that's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You're barely scraping by with that pathetic computer business of yours. Pathetic business. If she only knew. If any of them only knew. Lisa, listen carefully. I kept my voice measured, calm, the same tone I used in boardrooms when negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. You have 2 options. Either you apologize for cutting me from the guest list, for refusing to acknowledge me as your sister, and we pretend this conversation never happened. Or you find another venue for your wedding tomorrow. Silence. Then a sharp, incredulous laugh. You're bluffing. Lisa's voice dripped with contempt. This is some sick joke. You probably called pretending to be the owner just to spite me. It's exactly the kind of pathetic, attention-seeking behavior that got you kicked out of the family in the first place. Check the property records. I was unfazed. Morrison Properties LLC bought Grandview Manor back in April. And Morrison Properties is my company. I heard her breathing on the line, heavy, ragged, the sound of a woman whose carefully constructed world was developing cracks she couldn't explain away. Even if that's true, she finally said, her voice wavering, which I don't believe for a second, you wouldn't cancel my wedding. You're my sister. You're not that cruel. You're right, I said calmly. I'm not cruel. I just have no intention of hosting a celebration for people who consider me a disgrace to the family. There's a difference. This is insane. Her voice pitched higher. I'm calling Dad. He'll sort this out. He always does. Great idea. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years, my father's direct line. I let it ring twice, then answered. Samantha, what the hell is going on? No greeting, no pretense of concern. Straight to business, as always. Lisa is hysterical, claiming you own some wedding venue and are trying to sabotage her wedding. Hello, Dad. I kept my voice pleasant, conversational. How are you? It's been what, almost 2 years since we last spoke? You're looking well. I mean, I assume you are. I wouldn't actually know, since you haven't bothered to see me or ask how I'm doing in all that time. Don't play games with me, Samantha. His voice was sharp, impatient. The same tone he'd used my entire life whenever I dared to question him. Lisa says you're threatening to cancel her wedding. I want to know what's going on. I'm not threatening anyone. I leaned back in Megan's chair, watching the afternoon sun glint off the manor's fountain through the window. I simply informed her that, as the owner of Grandview Manor, I have the right to decide what events take place here. And I've decided that I'm not interested in hosting a wedding for someone who explicitly told the event planner I was unwelcome. A pause. A long one. So you actually do own Grandview Manor? His voice was different now, still guarded, but with an undercurrent of something I'd never heard from him before. Uncertainty. And other properties? Yes. How? The word cracked like a whip. You left Henderson Financial with nothing. You had, what, maybe $50,000 in savings? $50,000 doesn't buy a venue like that. It doesn't even buy the parking lot. I smiled to myself. He still had no idea. None of them did. I had more than savings when I left, Dad. I spoke slowly, deliberately, letting each word land. I had 3 years of contacts that I built working at your firm. I had a deep understanding of the Chicago real estate market, thanks to all those municipal bond deals I prepared while Marcus took the credit. I had relationships with investors who trusted me, not my brother, not you. And I had something else you never noticed, because you were too busy telling me I wasn't good enough. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I had talent. This is ridiculous. My father's voice was dismissive, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping in. Even if you managed to buy one single property, and I'm not saying I believe you have, Grandview Manor is worth at least $8 million. You simply couldn't have had that kind of capital. Not in 3 years. Not starting from nothing. I crossed my legs and settled deeper into the chair. Megan had wisely excused herself to the lobby, leaving me alone with this conversation. Dad, remember the Millennium Development Project? The one where the city needed $200 million in financing for the new cultural district. A beat of silence. Of course. That was Marcus's deal. One of his biggest wins at the firm. No, it wasn't. I let the words hang in the air. That was my deal. 8 months I spent building relationships with the city planning committee. I attended every meeting, made every phone call, smoothed every bureaucratic hurdle. I put together the entire financing structure from scratch. I negotiated with the contractors and finalized every last term. Marcus just signed the papers at the end and took a photo for the corporate newsletter. My voice was firm, unwavering. Ask him about the details sometime. He won't be able to tell you. Silence. And the Patterson Industrial acquisition? I continued. The deal that brought Henderson Financial $15 million in fees? That was my work too. I identified Patterson as a takeover target. I built the financial models that showed the potential returns. I personally presented the deal to Patterson's board of directors, something Marcus was too afraid to do himself. He just presented my materials at the internal meetings and got the promotion that should have been mine. I could hear his breathing on the line now, heavy, uneven. The sound of a man realizing that the foundation of everything he believed might be cracking beneath him. For 3 years, I said, I built your business while you and Marcus took all the credit. And through all of it, you kept telling me I wasn't smart enough, not assertive enough, not aggressive enough, not a true Henderson. So I left. And I started from scratch. The only difference is, now I get to keep the credit for my own work. Even so. His voice was weaker now, but he pushed on, desperate to find solid ground. Even so, one property doesn't make you some development queen. One property doesn't. I pulled out the folder George had prepared for me, even though my father couldn't see it. I didn't need to look at the numbers. I knew them by heart. Morrison Properties currently owns 17 commercial properties in Chicago and the suburbs. I interrupted calmly. Their total value is approximately $180 million. In addition, we have controlling stakes in 3 major construction projects launching next year. And we are currently in negotiations to acquire the building that houses Henderson Financial Group. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that I genuinely thought the call had dropped. I pulled the phone away from my ear to check, still connected. Finally, you're trying to buy our building? My father's voice was barely recognizable. Stripped of its usual authority, reduced to something almost fragile. I've already made an offer, I replied calmly. Your landlord has shown great interest. Something about Henderson Financial being 3 months behind on rent. Times are tough, I hear. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer. Careful. What do you want, Samantha? I considered the question. What did I want? Revenge? Satisfaction? Their humiliation? No, that wasn't it. That had never been it. I want my family to treat me with the same respect they show to strangers on the street, I said. I want Lisa to apologize for cutting me from her wedding guest list, not because I'm holding her venue hostage, but because she actually means it. I want you all to stop pretending I'm a failure just because I chose to succeed outside your little kingdom. I paused, letting that sink in. If Lisa apologizes, if we all acknowledge that you are wrong about my situation, then she'll have a beautiful wedding at one of the most exclusive venues in Chicago. And we can all move forward like a real family. Like we should have been doing all along. And if not, I looked out the manor's office window at the team of gardeners putting the finishing touches on the rose garden. White roses, Lisa's favorite. They had no idea that the ceremony scheduled to take place there tomorrow hung by a thread. Then she has the remaining 18 hours to find another venue for her wedding. I kept my voice level. I hear most places book up about a year in advance. But maybe she'll get lucky. That's blackmail. No, Dad. I allowed myself a small smile. It's business. Something I learned from you, by the way. The line went dead. He didn't say goodbye. He never did. An hour later, my phone rang again. Lisa's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Samantha. Her voice was different now. Quieter. The hysteria had drained away, leaving something raw and uncertain in its place. Yes. A pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her standing somewhere, probably in her childhood bedroom at our parents' house, surrounded by wedding preparations that had suddenly ground to a halt. Mom says I need to apologize. I almost laughed. Of course. Her mother told her to. Not because she felt it, but because she was told to. Because the alternative was too catastrophic to contemplate. And what do you think? I asked. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 15. 20. I think Lisa's voice cracked slightly. I think I don't understand how this happened. How you went from being the family disappointment to owning half of Chicago, and none of us even knew. How's that possible? How did we miss it? I considered my answer carefully. I stopped being your scapegoat and started being successful. It's not the same thing. Another pause. When Lisa spoke again, her voice was smaller still. We really hurt you, didn't we? The question hung in the air between us. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something shift inside me. That tight knot of resentment I'd been carrying, the one that had fueled me through late nights and early mornings, through deals won and obstacles overcome, loosened, just slightly. Because this was the first time anyone in my family had admitted that their treatment of me might have been unfair. The first time anyone had asked, rather than accused. Yes, Lisa. My voice was steady, but something in my chest ached. You really did. I'm sorry. The words came faster now, tumbling out like they'd been dammed up for too long. I'm sorry for cutting you from the wedding. I'm sorry for calling your business a failure. I'm sorry for believing everything Mom and Dad said without ever asking your side. I'm sorry for she stopped, took a breath. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know how to make it right, but I want you at my wedding if you'll still come. I thought about it. I could have made her grovel longer. I could have demanded apologies from the whole family, formal, written, witnessed. I could have made them acknowledge every slight, every dismissive word, every single time they had made me feel small and insignificant and less than. I had the power to do that now. The power to make them bend. But Lisa was still my sister. And beneath all her snobbery, her casual cruelty, her years of going along with the family narrative, I heard something I hadn't heard in years. Genuine remorse. I'll come, I said finally. Really? Really? Her voice lifted, hope breaking through like sunlight after rain. Yes. But Lisa, I paused, making sure she was listening. This conversation never happened. Tomorrow, to everyone there, I'm just another guest at a wedding who appreciates a good venue. No explanations, no dramatic reveals. Just your sister, attending your wedding like a normal person. I understand. She was quiet for a moment. And Samantha? Thank you. For this. For everything. Don't thank me yet. I haven't seen the centerpieces. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. It was the first time I'd heard that sound from her in years. The next day, I arrived at Grandview Manor at 3:30 p.m., exactly 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. I had chosen my outfit carefully. A navy blue dress, elegant, sophisticated, but not flashy. Understated jewelry. Heels that were stylish, but wouldn't sink into the grass of the rose garden. I wanted to blend in with the guests, to be unremarkable, to simply exist in the background of my sister's carefully planned day. But as I walked through the main entrance, past the fountain where a string quartet was tuning their instruments, past the florists making last-minute adjustments to the arrangements, I couldn't help the quiet pride that swelled in my chest. I looked around at the restored 1920s mansion, the immaculate gardens, the elegant ballroom visible through the French doors. This place had been neglected for decades before I bought it. Underfunded, underappreciated, slowly decaying into mediocrity. I had changed that. I had poured millions into its restoration, had hired the best architects and designers, had transformed it into Chicago's premier wedding destination. Couples now booked it 2 years in advance. Society pages featured it regularly. It was, by every measure, a stunning success. And my family had absolutely no idea that I was the one who made it possible. Today, that would change. Not through confrontation, not through drama, but simply through my presence. Through the quiet fact of me being here, in this place that I owned, watching my sister marry the man of her dreams. I smiled to myself and walked toward the rose garden. Lisa looked stunning. Her wedding dress was an exclusive design, cream silk, delicate lace, a train that seemed to go on forever. The kind of dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Then she saw me. She broke away from her bridesmaids mid-sentence and hurried across the marble lobby, her dress swishing against the floor. The bridesmaids exchanged confused glances, but Lisa didn't seem to notice or care. "Samantha, you came." Her eyes were bright, whether from relief or emotion I couldn't tell. "Of course I came." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You look amazing, Lisa. Truly. Thank you." She glanced around quickly, then lowered her voice. "And thank you for everything. The venue, it's just perfect. More perfect than I ever imagined. I'm glad you like it." I meant it. Whatever else had happened between us, seeing her this happy stirred something in me I hadn't expected. She hesitated, biting her lip. Then she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Can I ask you something? And please be honest." I waited. "Are you really as successful as you told Dad yesterday?" Or was that she stopped, searching for the right word? Was that part of the negotiation? I smiled. A real smile, not the polished boardroom version. Even more so, actually. But we'll talk about that another time. I squeezed her hand again. "Today is your day. Yours and Kenneth's. Go enjoy it." She nodded, blinking rapidly. Then she surprised me by pulling me into a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you, Samantha. For everything." And then she was gone, swept back toward her bridesmaids and the final preparations, leaving me standing alone in the lobby with a complicated feeling I couldn't quite name. The ceremony was beautiful. Lisa and Kenneth exchanged vows in the rose garden under a perfect September sky, cloudless, warm without being humid, the kind of day that made you believe in good omens. The officiant spoke of love and commitment and partnership. Lisa's voice only trembled slightly when she said her vows. Kenneth beamed the entire time. And I sat in the third row, surrounded by family and friends who had absolutely no idea that the owner of this stunning venue was sitting among them. They saw a woman in a navy dress attending her sister's wedding. Nothing more. That was exactly how I wanted it. The cocktail hour was held on the terrace, overlooking the gardens. I drifted through the crowd with a glass of champagne, exchanging pleasantries, making small talk. And somewhere along the way, I realized that several of the guests were familiar. Not personally familiar, professionally familiar. There was Betty Chin, the real estate developer I'd been trying to schedule a meeting with for months. There was David Foster, whose investment firm had been circling one of my properties. There was Eleanor Whitmore, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Naperville. By the time dinner was announced, my clutch purse contained 3 new business cards and my phone held 2 requests for meetings the following week. Not bad for a wedding. During the reception, as the band played and guests filled the dance floor, my father appeared at my elbow. He looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo. The collar seemed too tight, the shoes too polished. He was a man accustomed to boardrooms and corner offices, not social gatherings where he had to make small talk with people he didn't control. "Samantha." He cleared his throat. "Can we talk?" I considered refusing. I had every right to. But something in his expression, uncertainty, perhaps, or vulnerability, made me nod. We stepped out onto the terrace, away from the noise and music. The September air was cooler now, carrying the scent of roses from the garden below. He stood beside me at the railing, not looking at me, looking out at the garden where Lisa had said her vows just hours ago. "I owe you an apology," he said. No preamble, no careful setup. Just the words. "For what exactly?" I kept my voice neutral. He winced at my bluntness. "Good." He should. "For underestimating you." He counted on his fingers, as if checking items off a list. "For taking you for granted. For letting Marcus take credit for your work. For making you feel like you had to choose between family and success." He finally turned to look at me. "For a lot of things, Samantha. Too many things." I studied his face carefully in the fading light. He looked older than I remembered. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His hair was grayer. He looked tired. Worn. Like a man who had spent years building something only to realize it might have been built on the wrong foundation. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you know?" I held his gaze. "Did you know Marcus was taking credit for my deals?" He was silent for a long time. The music drifted through the French doors behind us. Somewhere inside, someone was laughing. "I suspected," he finally said. His voice was heavy. I saw the patterns. The way certain deals would land on his desk, and suddenly, he was an expert on subjects he'd never shown interest in. The way he couldn't answer detailed questions about the financing structures he supposedly created. He paused. But I didn't stop it. I told myself it would toughen you up. That you needed to learn to fight for recognition, to push back, to demand what was yours. That if you couldn't, maybe you didn't deserve it. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, I'd moved past anger. Something closer to sadness. Or did you really think Marcus deserved the praise more than I did? I asked quietly. Because he's your son and heir, and I'm just a daughter who would eventually get married and leave the business anyway? He didn't deny it. He didn't say anything at all. He just stood there, looking out at the garden, and his silence was the most honest answer he could have given. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I'm proud of what you've built, Samantha. Truly proud. I just wish," he stopped, swallowed. "I just wish we had built it together. The way a family should." I let his words hang in the air between us. The band inside started a new song, something upbeat, danceable. More laughter drifted through the doors. "We can't go back, Dad." My voice was steady. "We can't undo the last 3 years. Or the 25 before that, for that matter." "I know. But maybe," I considered my next words carefully, "maybe we can figure out what comes next. Together. If you're willing to do the work." He turned to look at me. Something like hope flickering in his tired eyes. "I'd like that." I nodded once. "Good. Then let's start there." I looked through the French doors into the ballroom, where Lisa was dancing with her new husband. Kenneth spun her gracefully, and she laughed, head thrown back, eyes bright, the picture of happiness. Around them, friends and family filled the dance floor, their faces glowing in the warm light of the chandeliers. It was the life I had once dreamed of. Family recognition. A place in their world. Validation of my worth. I had spent years wanting that. Years believing that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, proved myself enough, they would finally see me. Finally accept me. Finally love me the way I needed to be loved. It had taken leaving them to understand that I didn't need their validation to have worth. I didn't need their recognition to be successful. I didn't need their love to be whole. But standing here, watching Lisa dance at her wedding, a wedding that was happening because I had chosen mercy over revenge, I realized something else. I didn't need them. But I still wanted them. Not their approval, not their validation. Just them. My family. Imperfect and flawed and capable of cruelty, but still my family. Dad, I said, turning back to my father. I want to show you something. I took out my phone, unlocked it, and opened the banking app. Then I handed it to him. He took it hesitantly, as if it might bite him. I watched his face as he scrolled through the account summaries for Morrison Properties and its subsidiaries. The main operating account. The investment accounts. The property holdings. The projections for next year's IPO. His eyes widened. Then widened more. By the time he reached the final page, his mouth was slightly open. My God, Samantha. His voice was barely above a whisper. You're worth more than Henderson Financial Group. More than the Ashworth family. More than, he looked up at me, something like awe in his expression. More than anyone at this wedding, actually. But how? How did you do this in 3 years? I took the phone back and slipped it into my clutch. The same way you built your business, Dad. One deal at a time. One property at a time. One relationship at a time. I met his eyes. I just did it without anyone's help and without anyone taking credit for my work. We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the music and laughter drifting from the ballroom. Somewhere inside, someone was making a toast. Cheers erupted. What now? My father finally asked. The question was simple, but I heard everything beneath it. Uncertainty. Hope. Fear. Regret. A lifetime of mistakes he was only beginning to understand. Now, Lisa has a beautiful wedding that she'll always remember. I gestured toward the ballroom. And maybe, if you're interested, we can talk about how Henderson Financial might work with Morrison Properties on future projects. His head snapped toward me. You'd do business with us? After everything. I'd do business with you, Dad. I held his gaze. But as equals. Not as a daughter needing her father's approval. Not as the family disappointment trying to prove herself. As the CEO of a company that might benefit from a partnership with another company. Nothing more, nothing less. He nodded slowly, processing. I think I'd like that. I think he paused, searching for words. I think I'd like to get to know this version of you, Samantha. The one I never bothered to see. Good. I allowed myself a small smile. Have your people contact mine on Monday. We'll set up a meeting. He stared at me for a moment. Then he laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine, the kind I hadn't heard from him in years. When did you become so ruthless? He asked, still chuckling. I smiled. I learned from the best. As the evening wound down and guests began to collect their favors and call for their cars, I found Lisa near the exit, saying goodbye to the last of her friends. Her cheeks were flushed from dancing, her hair slightly disheveled, her dress still perfect despite hours of movement. She saw me approaching and broke into a smile. Not the polished society smile she'd worn all evening. A real one. Samantha. She pulled me into a tight hug before I could even speak. Thank you. For everything. For the venue. For coming. She pulled back, her eyes glistening. For not letting me ruin this completely. I was so awful to you and you still. You didn't ruin anything, Lisa. I squeezed her hands. You just learned an important lesson about making assumptions about people. She sniffled, laughing a little. And what's that? I smiled. That you never know what someone is capable of until you give them a reason to show you. Sometimes the people you've written off are the ones who will surprise you most. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I'm glad you're my sister, Samantha. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that. Better late than never. I kissed her cheek. Now go enjoy your wedding night. Kenneth's waiting. She glanced back at her new husband, who was talking with his parents near the door. Then she looked at me again. We're going to be okay, aren't we? Our family, I mean. After everything. I thought about it. The years of hurt. The dismissals. The assumptions. The casual cruelty of being treated as less than. We're going to be different, I said. And different might be better. We'll find out together. I drove home to my penthouse in silence, the city lights reflecting off the lake as I crossed the bridge. My mind replayed the events of the last 24 hours like a film I couldn't stop watching. The phone call from Megan. The satisfaction of watching her realize her mistake. Lisa's panic. My father's shock. The wedding itself, beautiful, perfect, exactly as it should have been. For 3 years, my family had thought I was a failure. They had whispered about me at dinner parties, had shaken their heads over my poor choices, had convinced themselves that I had thrown away my potential and disgraced the Henderson name by leaving their world. They didn't understand. I hadn't thrown anything away. I had taken everything I had, my talent, my knowledge, my connections, my drive, and yes, even my anger, my resentment, my desperate need to prove them wrong, and I had invested it all. Not in their world, but in mine. In something bigger and better than they could ever have imagined. The city lights blurred as I drove. I wasn't crying, I didn't cry anymore, hadn't in years. But something in my chest felt full. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with something quieter. Something that felt almost like peace. Tomorrow, I would wake up and get back to work. There were deals to close, properties to acquire, an IPO to prepare for. But tonight, I let myself feel it. I had one. Not the way they thought winning looked. Not with public triumph or humiliated enemies or dramatic confrontations. I had one quietly, steadily, by building something real while they weren't watching. And the best part? They still didn't know the half of it. The wedding was just the beginning. Monday's calendar was already full, meetings with 3 major developers about a potential joint venture on the west side, a city council hearing about the cultural district expansion that I had been lobbying for months, and a conference call with investors about the upcoming IPO for Morrison Properties, scheduled for next year. The public offering would value my company at nearly $500 million, assuming the markets cooperated. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, I was just Samantha Anderson, the woman who owned the most beautiful wedding venue in Chicago. The woman who had finally received an apology from the family that had spent years believing she was nothing. The woman who had driven home from her sister's wedding with something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. I changed into silk pajamas and poured myself a glass of water, then stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking out at the city spread below. Chicago at night was a sea of lights, office buildings, apartment towers, the glittering ribbon of Lake Shore Drive. Somewhere out there, in one of those buildings, my family was sleeping. My father, in the house I'd grown up in. My mother, probably already planning the next social event. Marcus, wherever he lived now, probably oblivious to how close his world had come to shifting. And Lisa, with her new husband, beginning her new life. I thought about the last 24 hours. Megan's first call, dripping with condescension. Her second call, dripping with panic. Lisa's fury, then confusion, then something that had almost sounded like remorse. My father's admission, small, incomplete, but real. I hadn't planned any of it. I hadn't orchestrated some elaborate revenge scheme. I had simply responded to circumstances as they arose, letting my family's own actions determine the outcome. And somehow, that made it better. That made it real. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well. I'd heard that phrase years ago, probably in some magazine article or self-help book, and I'd dismissed it as naive. Living well didn't silence your critics. Living well didn't make the people who hurt you acknowledge your worth. Living well didn't heal the wounds they'd carved into you. But I'd been wrong. Living well, truly well on your own terms, by your own definition, wasn't revenge at all. It was something bigger. It was freedom. And sometimes, if you were lucky, it was also the beginning of something more. Reconciliation built on respect instead of assumptions. Love softened by understanding instead of hardened by resentment. A family that finally saw you for who you actually were, not who they had decided you should be. Maybe that was possible for us now. Maybe not. But for the first time, I was willing to find out. I finished my water and set the glass on the nightstand, then climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and smooth against my skin. The city hummed softly outside my window, a lullaby of traffic and distant sirens. Falling asleep that night, I smiled, remembering Megan's panicked call from what felt like a lifetime ago. Her voice, high and trembling. Her apologies, tumbling over each other. Her dawning realization that the woman she'd dismissed so casually held all the power. Little did she know that her mistake, that insulting phone call, that moment of casual cruelty, had given me something I didn't even know I wanted. A chance. A chance to show my family that the daughter they had written off as a failure, the sister they had dismissed as insignificant, the woman they had decided wasn't worth their time or attention, that woman had become someone who could decide, with a single phone call, whether their most important event would happen or fall apart. But more than that, she had become someone who chose not to destroy them, even when she could have. Someone who chose mercy over revenge, connection over isolation, family over pride. Tomorrow, we would all wake up in a different world. A world where Samantha Henderson was no longer the family disappointment, no longer the cautionary tale, no longer the one who hadn't measured up. A world where Samantha Anderson, CEO of Morrison Properties, existed. A woman who had turned her family's contempt into motivation, their dismissal into determination, their cruelty into the fuel that built an empire they couldn't even have imagined. I closed my eyes, still smiling. And honestly, that feeling, this quiet satisfaction, this deep and abiding peace, was better than any wedding I had ever attended. Better than any triumph I had ever imagined. Better than revenge could ever be. Because revenge would have made me like them. This made me something more. I drifted off to sleep with the city lights painting patterns on my ceiling, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't dream of proving them wrong. I dreamed of building something new. Not alone this time, but together.